Hello, everybody, for a new exciting live Q&A session. Today, we are very happy to have with us Michael Farlekas, who is the CEO and President of E2open. Michael, great pleasure to have you again with us, and thanks for making the time.
Radu, it's great to see you again. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and looking forward to a lively discussion. So we really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience.
And as many of the people watching, and some who don't, so Michael, on one side, let me introduce firstly E2open. So as many of you know, it's one of the largest B2B provider for cloud-based on-demand software for supply chains. They operate under the principle of visibility for all modes, all legs, all regions. And they have some great solutions. And Michael is obviously, being the CEO and the president, is overall responsible for the company's operations, sales, marketing, strategy, and services, professional services. And he has spent 20 years plus in the industry across different roles within the supply chain management software. So he knows quite a bit about the growth and the progress that the industry has made. And Michael shared during the summit, the supply chain summit, he had one on a panel. He shared thoughts on managing risk and disruption, and as well as he gave a presentation in terms of driving the future of supply chains in this era that has an increase of uncertainty. We have COVID, we have different other crises that come to us. So I'll start today with asking Michael some of the questions that were asked and were passed on the summit. But also, I want to encourage everybody watching right now, post your questions as usual on the comments section, and we will take and ask Michael live as well. So without further ado, Michael, first and foremost, we got this question, and it's a relevant question. Let's start here. What's the difference and main differentiator between E2open as a software service provider and the others that are there on the market?
Yeah, it's a great question, and obviously, our company's grown significantly over the past 5 years. We've grown in terms of our size, but we've also grown in terms of the breadth of our offering. So I think it's natural people to kind of want to understand, who we are, what we are, and why we're different. The biggest difference is that we solve a problem of connectivity, and the connectivity problem we solve is one of outside in and end to end. And that's a very differentiated approach from how most supply chain software companies have proceeded over the last really 25 years, where they were functionally siloed to do one thing or the other. That's the end-to-end problem we're solving with an end-to-end solution set that's connected natively. And the second is outside in. And that means, most large scale, maybe small scale manufacturers and retailers rely on other people, other parties, other companies to do a lot of the work for them. It's in a very outsourced world. And some studies show 80% of a company's activities are actually done outside their four walls. So where the data is resident and where it changes is never inside the four walls of the manufacturer or retailer. It's always outside. So we bring that together, that data from that vast ecosystem, to our applications natively in one place. So we bring data and applications together. That makes us extremely different than really anybody in the market, and that's differentiated from the legacy approach of having to do point-to-point connections as a company through your own EDI vans, and then figure out how do you make the data available to applications. We handle all that for our customers. We have a network of 200,000 plus parties on it that's completely reusable. So when somebody signs on to our platform, we handle the data connectivity piece, we handle the data harmonization, we handle data synchronization, and we embed that right into our applications, in streamlining the implementation process, but more importantly, providing more value of the applications. And it's a very simple thought process. You have data and you have applications. Applications are useless without the data that's necessary to make decisions. And conversely, data by itself isn't all that valuable. So bringing them together on one platform makes us an extremely unique offering for our clients. And that's why we've seen our business grow significantly over the past 5 years.
Mm-hmm. And I know, and I remember the analogy that you used in your presentation at the summit was enabling companies to look as further as they can through the wind mirror, right? To see as much as possible into the future, into their demand, into their forecasts, to predict what is coming their way, to predict what the clients want. So I wanted to ask you, what can practically companies do in terms of building this almost I think you use the term anti-fragile. It's a term to build resilience, build redundancy, and be ready for whatever comes their way. Given you have COVID, you have other crises, you have other black swan events potentially.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and my team makes fun of me and call me the analogy king. So I'm gonna give another analogy. And I listen to in American football, running back is a person that has to get the ball and run down the field. And one of the best running backs in the world described it this way. He said, "If I'm worried about the person in front of me that's trying to tackle me, I'm worried about the wrong thing. I need to be worried about the tackler 2 or 3 levels deep in the field, because I should have already taken care of and set up and been able to maneuver around the person right in front of me." I think that's kind of how I think about the world, meaning you have to be able to look as far out into the future as possible, and then from that perspective, be able to build a landscape and resiliency into your overall ecosystem. And if you can get to that place, that means you're looking out over the horizon and you can deal with all the disruptions that come with you in the here and now. If a large enterprise and a leader of a large enterprise is worried about what's going to happen today, tomorrow, next week, they'll never really be able to understand what's happening downrange and be able to understand how they avoid the really big problems that might happen, in the future. So I think that's kind of how I think about our business. I think about helping our clients, which is you have to have a process or structure which automates handling the problems in the near term. And if you can get that set and automated as much as possible, it frees up the thinking of your organization to look further down range, further down the field, to understand what might be there to take advantage of and also to avoid. So you got to think about risk in 2 ways. Risk to me looks like deviation from the plan. Now, risk can present itself in terms of I have a problem to avoid, but it also could present itself in terms of I see an opportunity, and if I'm not prepared to capture that opportunity, then I have a loss as well. So there's 2 sides of that coin. You want to avoid negative opportunities in the future, but you also want to capture and realize the potential of future opportunities that might be positive for your business. You can't do either of those 2 things if all you're worried about is, where is my truck today? Like that. Yeah. If the organization is focused on that, they can't focus on, why is it that my power supplies are only coming from one vendor in one geography? That's not super helpful. But if all you're worried about is today, you can never really think about tomorrow.
Mm. And there is a very specific, and I know that you have a couple of case studies, but the free trade agreements, obviously we've had tariffs as well that have kind of complicated life and in a very fast manner. But specifically, I know that you guys have solutions around embedding that into the software offering, that it kind of helps companies in a very fast way. Maybe you can share a little bit about that, because I think specifically for free trade agreements, FTAs, not all companies are fully utilizing it, and sometimes you can get lost in the. Yesterday I was literally on a webinar, and one free trade agreement had 600 pages. So I don't think when you look at that, you have any sort of passion to go through those 600 pages. So how are you helping companies, maybe specifically on that aspect?
Yeah, well, we have we mentioned our network. We have 4 ecosystems in our network. One ecosystem is global trade, and we have a team that combs through each of those trade agreements, each of which are tens of thousands of pages long, each of which change every single day. There's roughly 200 countries in the world. Each of those countries make small and large changes to their laws, and those laws affect trade. And those laws could be as simple as you can no longer ship to John Smith because he's a suspected terrorist, or you can no longer ship rosewood from this jurisdiction to that jurisdiction. Those are small changes. You have big changes like USMCA, which was a gigantic change to the laws that happened literally overnight. So we've been talked about for a long time, and then there was a day that cut over. So our team collects all that information every single day, big and small, and then we codify that into a library, and that library becomes pushed available in the software to our clients. So that's an example of taking on that responsibility for our customers, which is the here and now that we take care of in mass, so that our customers can think about the future. They don't have to worry so much that their operation is going to be impacted by all these changes that they really can't understand anyway, because they happen so frequently. You have to have a huge team themselves to worry about it. So by allowing us to do that for the biggest companies in the world every single day, it takes that burden off of them. They can be confident that they have the best system in the world to manage that every single day. So we see that as a huge part of our platform. Now, going back to the original question of what makes us different, global trade has always been like a compliance item that's maybe siloed in an organization, and maybe it's like just one piece of the puzzle that was always added on. But by embedding that capability natively in all of our applications, that means we can do more with that data. Let me give you an example. In transportation management, if we book about 26% of the world's ocean freight on our platform. We can embed cargo screening into that process in line. So as the freight forwarder is booking something, they can actually see, is this a denied party? Is this cargo you can't actually ship up front, rather than waiting downscale and having that cargo show up later as a problem. And in the planning solution, if we can think about landed costs using tariffs as part of the planning process, then that means we can have a better answer in the planning process in the beginning and then cascade that through later on. So everything's about getting the information as soon as you possibly can in the event horizon, so that you can not propagate those errors as you go downstream. So that's how we avoid costs for our customers. That's how we add the most value for them.
And in the let's say that I'm a customer, right? And we're having a question related to that from Elena. Thanks for that. And in my network, right? And even whether it is channels, whether it's vendors, whether it's partners, logistics providers, there's different degree of digitalization, right? And we have, even in the maritime industry, you have everything from paper to bill of ladings to fax still, I guess. If you are to come, to a company like that, you as a E2open, what would be the low-hanging fruits? Where would you look? Because in order to have that data, when you have an ecosystem that is fairly different in terms of the capacities and the digital tools that they may have available, what's the best way to identify those low-hanging fruits for them to also make it easier for them, right, to get you on board, I guess?
I'll tell you my personal view, and then I'll tell you about the real world. And my personal view, if I was starting a business from the ground up, the first thing I would really try to understand is my demand first, and accurately forecast your future demand as accurately as you possibly can, as far in the future as possible. So if you were to come to me and say, what should I do first? I would say, let us gather the demand signals for you, which looks like order information, sentiment information, things that will predict demand in the future, and let us understand and help you and give you a forecast of what's going to ship and be sold and received by your customers every single day, by item, by geography, by store, or by channel. And if you can get that part as accurate as possible, everything behind it becomes a heck of a lot easier, and you avoid a lot of waste, right? So that's what I would say to any customers. If you really want to kind of improve your supply chain, get more accurate in terms of what you're actually going to sell in the future. It's logical, right? If I had a lemonade stand and I could predict how much lemonade I was going to make at that lemonade or sell at that stand tomorrow, I would make just enough lemonade so at the end of the day I'd have zero waste, right? It's if you take that one little a very simple kind of ecosystem, expand that out, it's really the same thing. So that's what I would tell our customers. If you're starting from scratch, do that. Now, the reality is, since we deal with the biggest companies in the world, no one's starting from scratch. So in that case, what really happens in the real world is companies have burning platforms of where they find that they have the biggest problem. That biggest problem could show up in terms of too many disruptions, too many out of stocks, too much inventory, not really a good control of where their inventory is or freight is. So in reality, our customers start with us in one place or the other, depending on where their biggest burning platform is. And then from there, we tend to expand. So we have a concept of continual improvement and this concept of business releases. So we have customers, our average customer is over 12 years with us. And it's because we tend to help them in 6-month increments. So we don't look to change the world. We just look to make today a little better than yesterday. And we do that in really 6-month projects that are small and pay for themselves as they go. And that's been a really great pragmatic approach to driving value for our customers. Remember, every company in the world is very large and has lots of competing interests. And if we just isolate it to a journey that's taken step by step over 6-month process, you get there further faster than trying to change the entire ecosystem at one time. So that's how I think about it. In the perfect world, demand sensing and get a more accurate forecast first. But the reality is, start wherever you think the biggest problem is, and then we can grow from there.
And most likely in another point to reality, nobody and no company wants to take, especially nowadays, wants to take the risk of of doing it all in one go. And also usually in supply chain, right, the more you can prove that you're paying for itself, like you rightfully said, the easier it is to get the next buy-in and the next buy-in and the next buy-in. So it kind of builds upon success.
It's all about risk-adjusted returns. So I'll kind of explain what that means. Risk-adjusted returns, meaning what return can you have for any investment, and how do you adjust and account for risk in that? And let me just talk about risk as I see it. There's several layers of risk as you think about really large-scale enterprises. The first level of risk, the most obvious one, is the software just doesn't do what it says it could do, or the company couldn't absorb it and get the value out of it that they thought. Okay, that's a level of risk defined by how much they expend on the project versus how much they get out of the project. That's a quantifiable risk. There's other larger risks that you have to contend with as well, like the risk of I can't ship my product because the system I rely on that's been in place and working, it goes away, and I put something else in place. Now, is that something else better than, the same as, or worse than? You don't know until you actually use it, right? Like no one knows. Like you just have to kind of have confidence in the partner you choose. So there's a risk associated with that. There's a risk that says I have to add more people in my process on the initial early on to get costs out of my system later on. So all of those things equal risk. So you have to account for all that risk, which is why a more pragmatic approach is don't try to change the world. Just try to limit the risk you have to get the most value, get the value out of it, and then prove and get confidence, and then move on to the next thing. And by doing it in that fashion, you will get you'll get further faster, as I said, and you'll spend less money doing it, and it'll be less disruptive, because all these companies are like airplanes flying, and they have to change the engine while the airplane's flying. I mean, there's just no other way of doing it than that, and that's a proposition that people have to contend with, and everybody on this webcast knows that. You have to run the business as you're making the business better. That's the challenge we all face in the kind of supply chain software world. It's a challenging world, but it's actually kind of a fun challenge to kind of think through how you solve that puzzle.
Yeah, and we're seeing quite, actually even in the comments, there's a couple of people that are echoing what you're sharing. And I wanted to, and we're having this question, and I wanted to also see from you, Michael, do you see this COVID-19 crisis as accelerating the process of adopting digital solutions, adopting software faster, or do you think, it's a crisis, it hits, things will go back to normal afterwards?
No, I look, the world is changing and has been changing for about the last 6 years. And it's changing in one very material respect, which is companies have relied on very sophisticated software to run their business in supply chain, all ends of the supply chain for the last 25 years. That world was defined by on-premise implementations that were siloed in nature. And you can just see it. I have an ERP, I have a WMS, I have a TMS, I have multiple planning systems. I have a planning system for supply, one for demand, one for my lines, one for my manufacturing sites. All of these things were really disconnected and siloed because of the nature of the only way it could be deployed, which is an individual solution on premise. That ship has sailed. There is no longer any on-premise solutions being built. Everything is in the cloud. So the whole world has to, again, move from this world of on-premise. It's working. Maybe not as well as I'd like it to work, but it's working. I get my product to my customers every single day. But they have to transition to a cloud environment that has opportunities and implications. And to me, that's where people have been going. And I think in the short term, the last 6 months, that has slowed down a little bit as people focus on the here and now. But coming out of this, we'll accelerate it dramatically, because people will realize that I have to be able to understand what's happening in the real world much closer to the event horizon than I have been able to in the past. I have to really be able to think about the future more. I have to be able to take demand signals in and be able to react to a changing landscape on my supply side and my distribution side. So there's a huge potential. This is only not even the first inning in terms of this transformation. And there's a long way to go. But at the end, the promise, and people are seeing this, is that there's a tremendous opportunity to lower inventory and get fewer expedites. And those are the two things that drive a lot of incremental costs for businesses. So when you think about what value do companies get by going to digitization? They get to have less inventory in the system, and they have to have fewer, very expensive expedites. And that's really kind of where the big cost drivers are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, it's easy for a P&L holder to kind of get the buck back and then buy some more. There's a very
let me give you one quick example. Like companies will oftentimes use air freight, to get massive amounts of product from one region to the other region. Why? Well, because it's a 10, 12-hour flight, and it's very predictable. So I have very small lead time variability, right? But it costs 7 times to 8 times more than shipping via ocean. Like that's the difference. I get more consistency of supply, but I pay a lot more money, 7, 8 times more. So if you can get lead time variability down by having better control of your supply chain, and take advantage of the cost difference of 7x, now that's value add. Right? That's what we're trying to create. Is that how do you get the lowest cost possible way of bringing product to market? That's the most accurate and the most predictable as you can.
Robert has a question that's an interesting angle, so I'll address it to you. So software as a service has become quite popular. His point is, do you think, Michael, we will see more managed services as the next step in supply chain, either from a consulting or a software provider perspective?
We see that already. In the first place, you saw it was in the transportation area most prevalently, where you have whole companies that were built around this concept of, hey, I will just completely outsource your transportation process, tendering, managing freight, and then adding software to that. And the value add there is you as a company can only see so much freight opportunity. But if I have a pool of 100 companies, I can consolidate demand, and I can drive better rates, and I could drive more efficient lane management. So I can take advantage as a shipper of head haul and back haul. Traditionally the trucking company takes advantage of the head haul back haul disparity of cost. So by combining that into a managed service, I get to add value to my customer, and then I take a portion of that as profit, right? So the profit plus the cost savings, is more value to the shipper. We're seeing that start to manifest itself in other areas, specifically in the planning area, where we're seeing companies saying, "Hey, I can just do a better job of planning for you," and we're starting to see that, as a next derivative of kind of cloud operations. And the more companies think about have an external world, and the more they can think about how they can get software to kind of reach the edges, the more that becomes an opportunity, and the more it'll become available. There's huge opportunities in that area. We see that every single day.
How about e-commerce? I mean, it has just blown out of proportion. I saw a graph today or yesterday where it showed that literally the growth was in the last 3 to 4 months was like the equivalent of the last 10 years. Some mind-boggling. I mean, I might not remember exactly, but it has grown quite a bit. How do you see that? Do you have also aspects of E2open that specifically look into last mile e-commerce deliveries and so on? And how has that kind of evolved in the last couple of months?
Yeah, I mean, we it's generational in a way. So you have a younger population that's very adept and very comfortable with doing more and more online. And then, older generation, myself, like if you can't go to the store literally, then what choice do you have? You start to adopt these technologies, and then you get to see the advantage of being able to, have something show up the next day or the same day. So I think that's kind of, driving it out of necessity. And I think the adoption that we're seeing now was just going to continue. I think what companies are kind of have in the past built into their infrastructure, especially on the retail side, is a bifurcated system where they said, I have a brick and mortar system that operates and has been in place for dozens, if not decades long, dozens of years, decades, 50 years, where just, I have a process and I follow. E-commerce comes along with a very different flavor, needing very different distribution modes, very different transportation modes. My warehousing has to be very different. I'm shipping pallets versus shipping eaches. That's a completely different environment. So originally, for the past, really 7 to 8 years, decade or so, companies have solved this problem by having 2 side-by-side, infrastructures, one from a brick and mortar and one for my online. And that obviously is not optimal because people want to have an omni-channel or all commerce approach. and they want to deal with the problem of inventory. So that's kind of where we see kind of visibility of inventory becoming extremely important. Because if I can see what inventory I have at every single store location, and I can see whatever inventory I have at every single warehouse location, whether if I'm a manufacturer or if I'm a retailer, that means I can ship from anywhere. That means I have a greater variety to be able to fill demand where it is without having to add increased inventory. So we see that as kind of the next real frontier in terms of blending, retail and manufacturing kind of together. At the end state, retailers will become manufacturers. We see that happening today, and manufacturers will become retailers because they're going to be able to ship more direct to their customers. And you see it with the wholesale, companies like Kirkland's, one of the biggest brands in the world. They came out of retail, but they're actually a manufacturer of a lot of products. So we see a blend of manufacturing and retail becoming actually one process, not a kind of a manufacturing process handed over to a retailer of sorts. It'll all become blended in one, which is how do I orchestrate the manufacturing and distribution of product becomes the problem versus how do I manufacture something and give it to a retailer? Like that's going to be a big shift over the next 10 years.
And look, Amazon and Alibaba, well, especially Amazon, I guess, but also Alibaba, they can also a little bit accelerate or give the right nudges and the right pushes because by the amount of data that they've got, and we've seen serious issues where, not to mention any names.
We talked about demand sensing, right? So when Amazon and Alibaba can sense demand, not by what somebody ordered, but what they're looking at online in mass, right? That drives a prediction. But that's the advantage they have. So what Amazon has led is a dramatic shift in supply chain. Is a corollary to what Walmart had done in logistics. So Walmart, really grew through a much more effective logistics process to their stores, really from 2000 to 2012, 15. That was their primary means of getting product to customers at a lowest cost possible. Amazon and Alibaba have taken that one step further. So they have a logistics prowess, but they also have a much deeper supply chain prowess because they can connect demand all the way back to every part of the supply. And by offering more and more services to their suppliers, they can control the entire supply chain. So they're actually doing what I said. They're just doing it in a way that has one ecosystem that spans across multiple enterprises. That's where the world is going to go. Amazon and Alibaba has figured this out. And manufacturers are going to have to also think about that problem in the same way. A little easier for Amazon to do that because they started from scratch. They could start from that perspective. A little harder for a mainline manufacturer when still 90% of their volume goes through brick and mortar for really large scale CPG food and beverage manufacturers. So although delivery and online sales are dramatically increasing, it still isn't that large a portion overall. So big manufacturers have to deal and contend with that shift. How do they go from one distribution process to another?
And look, I mean, where I wanted to add is so we've seen IKEA, we've seen Nike. I think there was some big, I mean, obviously, again, it's not like every manufacturer can do this, right? You also need a certain size and scale and logistics and supply chain that are very mature. And obviously these two are good companies and they have it. But there's also the reality that Amazon can look at, oh, I'm selling this toothbrush very well. Well, let me just make it myself and I'll sell it, by my own. And then that's it, you're out of business. So there's going to be potentially more and more of that, so that manufacturers are almost, and we've seen, I've seen myself, there's been a rise of startups that offer that direct access to consumers for brands and say, look, we bypass Amazon. It's not going to be possible. Ultimately, it's still a very important channel for a lot of companies, but there is also the downside that, okay, now they own your data and they own the customer experience to a certain degree. So do you actually want that or not?
These are all present, opportunities and challenges depending on which side of the ledger you sit. If you're a small candle maker, and you can access the Amazon network, you have distribution that you could never ever build yourself. If, on the other hand, if you're a very, very large brand owner, you mentioned one, how do I deal with that problem, right? How do I deal with, I want to control my brand and also access their distribution channel? Like that, it's a very different problem on what side of the coin you're on. But overall, what that presents is opportunity, and it has a way of leveling the playing field from very small companies to very large companies. And you see companies explode in terms of their opportunities to engage with social media and engage with a very large-scale global distribution network that's available to them, whereas 7 years ago it was unavailable to them. You could never actually execute that kind of hyper growth because you couldn't access the customers through branding, and you couldn't access distribution. With social networking, you can access your branding very quickly. And with distribution, with Amazon and others, you can access distribution very quickly. That's, I think, a good thing, because it kind of tends to level the playing field, and not just the largest companies in the world can be successful. So it presents all sorts of opportunities for innovation in terms of products, in terms of brands, and I think that's a good thing.
And we might not be far away from the day where Facebook and Google enter the playfield. We've seen some, Shopify went into some partnerships. It may soon be that we're going.
It's happening today. You can go on Instagram and have a direct buy on Instagram.
Yeah, no, I mean,
I like the thing. I hit the button and I buy it right from Instagram. I bypass everything. I mean, that's like, you talk about the dominance of different tech platforms. Well, the tech platforms, even if they're dominant today, they could be not dominant tomorrow because of a slight shift in capabilities. So it becomes a very dynamic marketplace.
I mean, there is the brand. Are you familiar with Allbirds? So they produce those, very sustainable and so on shoes. I mean, they mostly build that brand over social media, and it's quite incredible to see. I mean, I think they're now in the billions, and
from very small in I think 5 or 7 years, maybe something like that.
It happened fast. It happened pretty fast. So, and at the same time,
it really speaks to the very powerful force of market economics, which is, on one hand, it drives all sorts of value for lots of people. On the other side, it's very destructive. So it's destructive on one hand and very productive on the other hand. So you have people are only going to buy so many types of shoes, and you have a big brand. Well, okay, somebody's going to have to give up some of their brand, their market share for the new brand coming in. But it's that process of creative destruction that adds value to everybody, because inherent in that is a better product at a lower cost for people to use, and at the end state, that becomes powerful. People can have a better life expectancy and better quality of life at an overall lower cost. That's the power of kind of market economics, because it's all driven by that incentive to be able to grow.
And we have a question, and I want to ask you, and as we're approaching the end of the interview, but I want to ask you this question. So VMI has fallen out of favor because of the number of people required, and for companies to do it by themselves. But to your point with the distribution channel, the question goes: with more data and smarter software, do you think, Michael, that manufacturers will want to own by themselves more of the distribution channels?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to blend. I'm just going to give this in a quick description. A supplier is to a manufacturer what a manufacturer is to a retailer. And the supplier to manufacturer collaboration has been done, completed. The technology's there. It's no longer a pioneer. We have hundreds and hundreds of customers that use that capability today to exchange information in a very detailed fashion, in a very specific way, to help the supplier to manufacturer process be very efficient. And when I say a very detailed way, it means it's obvious that a manufacturer can have multiple suppliers for a key component of their cost of their ingredients or their components, and they're going to have the main line providers and the secondary and tertiary providers, and they're going to think about collaboration at different levels based on how much they volumely do. So on one hand, you have to be able to control the information between those parties, and it has to be very deep on their main suppliers, and then on the other ones, maybe not as deep. And you have to be able to blend those two things together. That's been sorted out. The technology's there. It's not new. It's implemented at huge scale. The biggest companies in the world leverage this. That's how primarily you have very low cost technology built in terms of devices. That's how they do that. That same process has not happened between manufacturing and retailing. So you still have this kind of over the fence mentality between manufacturer and retailer. Retailers produce a forecast, the retailers give it to the manufacturers promptly throw that forecast away because it's not very accurate and create their own. And then at the end of the month, they argue about why the forecasts weren't right. I mean, that's the process that happens every single day. I'm being very skeptical and negative on that process. But my point is this, is that at some point, they'll start to realize if they create one forecast together, they're going to have a much better chance of meeting that forecast, being much more accurate in terms of what the retailer's expectations are and the manufacturer's expectations are. And when we get to that point, you'll streamline that whole process. So I see the world, and this is a world that's going to change, not tomorrow, but maybe 5 to 10 years from now, where the collaboration between manufacturers and retailers become much more tightly integrated. And it's going to be because of the fact that retailers are going to want to understand more deeply the manufacturing process so they can figure out, their supply. And then manufacturers are going to need to figure out how they can access the consumer directly in a more proactive way. I mean, you see it with cars. Right. I mean, Tesla became big. Why? Because they own the customer relationship directly, not through an intermediary. Like that's a transformative thing for the car industry. It hasn't really ever been done before. And if it can happen there, it's going to happen in every facet of that process. It'll become blended in one, and it'll become much more complex, but it'll become much more efficient as well.
Last question from you, Michael, on the, I guess, mindset in some ways, but skill set in another way, right? So if you were to give one piece of advice for supply chain executives that are listening, and sometimes it's hard to keep up, not sometimes, it is hard to keep up with all the tech coming up, and AI, machine learning, blockchain, you name it, digital transformation, industry 4.0, there's a bunch of words that are flying around, right? And there's always going to be some new ones. But what's the best way to keep, to keep trace of all this tech, and I guess at the same time to best choose what makes most sense for your business at that point in time?
The people that have the best supply chains think of the long term, and don't try to solve all of the problems at one time. They start with where they want to end up on a continual journey, and they build the infrastructure in a very methodical, systematic way, and they make it additive. And that's what we see from the, our clients, we're fortunate to have the best supply chain companies in the world as our customers at the greatest scale you can imagine. So the biggest companies in the world, the most complex supply chains that are best at running supply chains, leverage our software to do, some parts and more parts of our platform. They all have the same thing in common, which is they take the long view and they don't try to solve all their problems overnight. And they focus on structure, and they focus on process, and most importantly, they focus on data. At the end of the day, it's all about the data. Like, you can have the best algorithm in the world, you can have the best machine learning in the world. It's useless if you don't have the data to fund those decisions. So that's really what I see as the most important element of building a very resilient or anti-fragile supply chain, is you have to start with a very solid foundation of data, and data has to be comprehensive, it has to be accurate, it has to be timely. In a world where your process is completely outsourced, there has to be a way of getting data from the event horizon where it happens, where the data actually changes from the system it changes in to your ecosystem in a way that gives you a comprehensive data set that's very timely and very accurate. And by accurate, I mean it's all harmonized. Companies that figure that problem out will be way further advanced than anybody else. That's kind of what I would think about. You can't solve these problems overnight. You have to solve them fundamentally.
And inbuild that anti-fragileness into the system. Michael, pleasure. Thanks a lot for the time, for the sharing great examples and case studies, and all the best on the journey ahead. On the obviously this year is going to be interesting and challenging for all of us, but keep doing a great job at E2open and on the journey with helping the clients forward.
And thank you for the opportunity. It's been great working with you over the past several weeks, and I look forward to doing more. So thank you very much, and good luck to you as well.